Good morning, good evening, good day, greetings and salutations. I would also add a good welcome to you to the Safe Room featuring Security SideQuest. My name is Tristan Watty, and I am joined today by the mysterious, the marvelous, the Marvel, Russ. I just had to see how to short it, right? That's how we got to do it. I got to get back into the muscle memory. We skipped a week, and I just got to, figure out how we do this again, all right? Well,
to be fair, that's also an M-word Memorial Day, so
yeah,
directly applicable.
Yeah, exactly. So we have to figure out how to do this. But the one thing we don't have to figure out is introducing ourselves. So my name is Tristan Watty, as I said, and I come to you from the Professional Services Division of AWS, where we help to accelerate customers' journey to the cloud in a secure manner. And Russ, where are you coming from?
I come from the Customer Incident Response Team. We help customers contain and go back to baseline after security incidents or events.
Yes. And I would also add a welcome to everybody joining in. And hello, Ari, thank you for being the first one. You get the honorary first. Right? And for everybody else joining in, feel free to let us know where you're tuning in from. What part of the state, what part of the country, or a different country. We always like to see where people are, dialing in from. And I realized I just dated myself by saying dial in because that's totally an old phrase. Right? But speaking of oldies but goodies, today's second poll is an interesting one. And that is, what's your favorite strategy game? And I throw this question to Russ while I judge.
Of course. Yes. But so, okay, I have two answers, right? Because you just said favorite strategy game. I assume that you put it intentionally vague. So I have a video game answer and an overall answer. And so it's mostly just because I want to call out Civilization, Sid Meier's Civ. So that's my favorite strategy video game. But if we're talking about just games in general, then I'm going to have to go with Risk. Especially, as a young high schooler, being a nerd, that was kind of our go-to. So,
yeah, Risk is a good one, and it's funny because there's so many levels to strategy games. But I'll go with a simple one, which will cause controversy for the board game answer, and then the video game answer. I got something else. Board game, Monopoly, and I back away. All right.
I'm not gonna lie. I'm not gonna lie, that's my least favorite strategy game.
And that's why I said it.
But I mean, hey, no one plays Monopoly and doesn't get upset. So the passion's there. I think that's a sign of people enjoying it if they're passionate. So there's
also, if you want to end a party, start Monopoly because everybody's mad and goes home.
If you want to end friendships, start Monopoly.
Start Monopoly. Yes, Risk, and there's a couple other ones, which we'll get into one other day. But for video game, Total War Shogun 2. It's an oldie. Came out in like 2011, but I find myself going back to it a bunch of times. Do I win? No, not at all. It's been 10 years. It's been 84 years since I last won it. Yeah. But it hasn't been 84 years since I said, Drag, thank you for joining. But we have to talk about something also that's near and dear to our hearts today. And it's something of the security variety. And Russ, what's today's topic?
So today we're going to go over some DevSecOps foundations. Going to get a little bit into DevOps and security's role in DevOps. We kind of had a little bit of a pause last week for Memorial Day, but before that we had our advanced forensics techniques episode. Don't worry if you weren't here because I wasn't here, so we can definitely discuss DevSecOps. I'm actually really excited about this episode. I think it's something that is kind of important and something that I think is a little bit sometimes misunderstood. So excited to be talking about it today.
Yeah, and that's a really good way to put it. It's sometimes misunderstood, and I think we're here to demystify. Hey, he said the description thing when it comes to DevSecOps, because today some of the general areas that we're going to dip our toes into briefly is the fundamentals. What is the security principles of DevSecOps? Then CI/CD, security integrations, pipelines, right? We always have to mention that. Visibility, monitoring, threat modeling. There's a bunch of different topics that kind of fall under the DevSecOps umbrella, and we can spend episodes, which we will, spoilers for future episodes. But today is just to kind of take the little tour. You know, when you go into a buffet, you kind of just browse around, you know, you go past the initial pieces of, you know, filler stuff, and you get to the meat of the heart of it. That's where we're going. So today is not filler, but I digress. When it comes to DevSecOps toolkit, what's your most valuable, Russ? When you look at your utility bill, your toolkit, what's in there, or a toolbox, I should say?
Oh man, I guess what isn't in there. You know, when we're talking about toolkits, especially if we're talking like AWS specific versus just like in general, like how like DevSecOps integrates. But like from a tools perspective, I think that we're looking at a lot of different tools. I think for me, I'm gonna go with probably Inspector. I think Inspector is kind of the first thing that comes to mind, especially because, you know, we're talking about, you know, not just the security testing aspect of it, but also the integration and the automation of that process. And so I think I'd go with Inspector.
That's a good choice. It is versatile, and people often don't look at Inspector as the first kind of thing that they go to. But once you start using it, you're like, turn it on. Just turn on Inspector. Just use it. Trust us. Right?
Yeah.
And it's one of those things when you think of your toolkit, and feel free in the chat, let us know what your go-to toolkit, as we ramble on this for a second, is exactly what you said. What is your AWS specific? My go-to, I would think, when it comes to this is, okay, pipelines, and thinking of pipelines. And I initially go with something like guard duty, and hear me out, just for the reason of detecting what's going on, right? We need some mechanisms. So I go to the guard duty, the config, and things of that nature when I'm thinking of the pipeline itself, right? Are we checking all these things? And then we get into a security pipeline. And within that security pipeline, hey, what are the gates and the tolls people have to go through before code gets from dev to UAT to prod, right? Mm-hmm. So just thinking of things like that. And then my brain starts to go towards, hey, policies, IAM, SCPs, you know, as tools. As you mentioned, there's a lot of tools in the toolkit, right? So it's hard to pick one.
Tons.
Yeah. But outside of the services, I like, you know, Ash, the automated security helper. That's always, and I also give a shout out to the Ash team when it comes to running security checks. Yeah, because you want to run security checks in your pipeline.
Definitely.
But yeah, I digress. I take the step back. I kind of move us like this and then come back into the middle, right? That's me bringing us back center. So, so I think when it comes to DevSecOps, the first thing is, if you haven't heard before, the secret is it's a mindset. It represents that fundamental shift in how teams approach the AWS cloud development. You know, rather than treating like security as a compliance checkbox or a final gatekeeper, it's baked in, right? You don't add the sauce after, you bake it in the middle, right? Think of it like cheesy bread, right? You want it inside, so you break and you see all of it. It's security goodness, right? You could tell us around lunchtime because all the food references just go up by 10. Yeah. So when we start to think about, hey, what is the mindset our organization should have, our environment should have? And that's where the DevSecOps piece comes into place, right? So if you think of from the planning and the initial design phase, you have security throughout that, and then you just continue to build on that, right? So development teams, so DevOps teams, they are trained to think like, hey, what is my attack surface? How do I consider potential vulnerabilities? How do I write code, configure services in such a way that it's secure by design, really? So that's kind of where we start to come into with the mindset. And after that, that's when you start to think of, hey, what are some of the core security controls and requirements I should have in place? That's another piece of the puzzle, right? And what is our non-negotiable security baseline? What do we have to have in place at a minimum in order to operate our AWS workloads? Right? And this is often an interesting point when you're having conversations with customers because they have business pressure, they have development timelines, and hey, we'll implement this later. Well, when you get to the DevSecOps world, you're planning all of this in alignment with the direction of your outcomes, really. So you want to make sure that you have least privilege and IAM policies that are fine-grained, things of that nature. I don't know. From your side, Russ, do you see this often as like the business pressure and the configuration of services kind of getting affected? And then DevSecOps comes in at, I don't want to say the last moment, but it's an afterthought a little bit?
Yes, absolutely. To be fair, usually the DevSecOps doesn't come in at all. That's why they come to me, because we're facing an incident or a security event. So yeah, but it is definitely something that I've seen, that we do come around to, after we actually contain the incident, and we're talking about, ways that we could, change things to probably prevent this incident from occurring in the future. So we definitely have a lot of DevSecOps, I guess, style or like based like recommendations, like, kind of just, we're more of like the rapid response force, so we don't get to dig quite as deep as you get to in ProServe. But we do provide those recommendations and try to have a little bit of a discussion about that, and just being like, if you implemented this, your web app might not have been popped, things of that nature. So I don't think we get quite as deep into it as you would, but that's definitely something that we see. It's definitely something that we can say is a trend, is that lack of, like you said, building security in from the beginning and making it a part of that process. It's usually pretty noticeable when it's not. So yes, absolutely.
Yeah, and I think part of that is the promotion, right? Security needs a promoter sometimes to say, hey, this is the way to go. I know you have your outcomes and your deadlines and things of that nature, but having that minimum security baseline defined helps with security awareness, because now you can talk to stakeholders saying, hey, we have A, B, C, and D that we need to implement. And these are the phases of how we're going to break it up, right? Because when you have that, you can start to put together, what's your target state security strategy? What's your North Star that you're heading towards? And then you can start to add on the bells and whistles a little bit after, but you need a starting point, right? What are your core security controls? And kind of delving into that a little bit more, right? When you think of security controls, we're not just talking about like MFA. Right? You want to broaden that to the different services and policies, from IAM to even your S3, your bucket policies, whatever, right? Do you have the DevSecOps mentality of peer reviews and version controls and regularly updating based on emerging threats, right? All these things factor in, because what you often see is, all right, we'll go from dev to production. It's like, we need a couple more steps than that. It'll work out a little bit better in your favor, because when you have that mindset of having multiple environments to test and peer reviews on every step of the way, it helps, right? It just helps to, one, optimize, but secure things a little bit better. Because what you often see is, okay, random person may have reviewed it. Oh, but I trust this person. They do good work. They did good code, and into production. And then production goes down. And it's like, hey, what happened? Yep. It's those little things. It's not check boxes, but it's a second set of eyes that you really need, because you're building those security foundations and baselines. And I'm going to say baselines 3 times so the people on the other side of the internet hear us, because we're promoting the security awareness with DevSecOps. And then you start to get into tooling, right? And that's where the fun part comes in, because everybody has their favorite tools, but it's how they play together, right? I think it was like amusement park where you have all these different things like, oh, this ride is cool. This ride is cool. I want to do this, and but what is your end goal? you kind of have to figure it out.
Definitely. So, I think there's also a lot of kind of confusion with that. When you say like bake security in, I see it, just for an example, I see a lot, on different chat boards or forums or LinkedIn for that matter, saying that DevSecOps is either dead or dying, because they're like, well, you just have, programmers who are able to code securely. Where does DevSecOps fit in there? And so, the whole point of security isn't to, slow things down or prevent things from, from doing what they want to do. So like when you have timelines and deadlines and, security is not there to ruin it and, get you to break your timeline, but to be able to, integrate as seamlessly as possible and help prevent, those outages to production and stuff like that. So it's really about integrating security in and not just necessarily using secure coding practices. It's more than just that. So I just wanted to kind of slip in there, and because I think that's a common thing that I've seen and heard about DevSecOps. It's not just another programmer who's specifically talking about security and how to build your code securely. That's something that we assume is happening already. This is about building the entire infrastructure for that web app or whatever you're building. Exactly. So yeah, just kind of wanted to call that out real quick.
That's a good call out, as well as saying hello. Thank you for joining us. And then we have a question. So, hello guys, may I know what are all the SecOps practices that can be done for EKS-based deployments? So when you say all of it, I can give you a couple to start off with, because there's so many. So EKS clusters with private endpoints, that's a good one. Make sure to implement, let's say, AWS IAM authentication for all your EKS clusters, role-based access controls, regularly audit IAM roles that with your clusters. Then you go for images, signing container images. Hey, there was also inspector that we talked about, and we could keep going on. Minimum base images. Make sure that not everything is baked into your image, because more baked in, larger security attack surface. So hope that answers a couple. I don't know if Russ, you have a few off the top of your head.
I don't off the top of my head, but I do know that we do have a container security basics episode. Another container needs our help. So if you want to go back to episode 10, maybe find a little bit more information about container security, because that's a big topic, like you said.
Yeah, exactly. And I love the way Russ does the promo for it. It's like, I don't know, but go back here. Aha, I saw what you did.
We did an episode.
So thank you for that question. But yeah, it's all part of the mindset, right? Because I think of it as you have your technical pipeline and you have your people pipeline, right? Of making everybody understand how those stay in sync along the way, right? So as we go into this, I think another part, to your point of just understanding pipelines and security, is how are we scanning pipelines, right? So what are your thoughts on security scanning in the CI/CD, Russ?
Yeah, I mean, it's like you're saying, you have your technical solutions and your people solutions. So when you're talking about security scanning and CI/CD pipelines, well, it also first, depends on what your development team is using, what their pipeline is. So like, for example, like I know that Code Build does integrate with like image scanning, right? So like, if you're using code build, that's your option right there. So I guess it's a little bit dependent, I'd say, on that, but like you're also going to integrate tools like the OWASP dependency check, which is open source, and things like that, where you'd be looking for like dependency scanning and identifying vulnerabilities. So I guess a little bit depends on what pipeline your dev team is using. I suppose when we're going to discuss a little bit later, for our quest, we'll talk about starting from scratch. But if you already have a pipeline for your dev team, you're basically using those tools to integrate. And so it's using what already exists to be able to identify those vulnerabilities. If you're looking for SQL injection or cross-site scripting, you're going to be looking within those tools like code build containers or whatever tooling you're running, and then using, say, code build and integrating that with your secrets manager, so that way you're validating access to your application, especially if there's sensitive information. So I guess it's can be a complex topic, and I'm trying to keep it like at the foundations level, but yeah, security scanning kind of leads into automated security testing. So looking at like I was saying before, inspector, to integrate that into the pipeline, having set points for security testing. I think, well, it's vital to DevSecOps in general, but it's also, how you're integrating within that pipeline. So it definitely is contextual, right, with the CI/CD, because it's run differently by different organizations. There's usually a good reason why they're doing it differently than other organizations. So it can be a bit contextual, but just being able to implement those things into the pipeline, having checkpoints to be able to do automated security testing and scanning. So there's a lot that goes into that, and then we can get a little bit deeper into things. So like implementing policy as code implementations. So like I know that like for cloud formation, you can define policy for infrastructure as code. So like you can also there's also custom policies for containers. I think that's like a specific agent that I can't remember the name of right now. But like, so, you're able to like version control your policies, integrate them directly into your pipeline, to be able to, have that as that extra authentication step. So, there's like a lot, right, that goes into it. It's
a rabbit hole, right? Depending really on which way you look at. And before I jump in on that, I know there was a question that's been set up, is what is better for security, Rust or Go? So this is an interesting one, because I know customers usually adopt both, but for different reasons, right? So I believe Rust you use more for your critical infrastructure, but if you have developers that need to develop rapidly and you want the most security component coverage, then you go with Go, right? So it's a combination and that Swiss cheese approach. So there's not one really better than the other. It's just depending on the use case.
Yep.
So
yeah, it's all about picking picking the right tool out of the toolbox, right, for the correct situation.
Exactly, right? And that's where we're going with even the CI/CD, right? You think you're SaaS, right? Your static applications security testing. So you have tools like CodeGuru, which analyze source code for security vulnerabilities, things of that nature. Then you go to your SCA, you go to your DAST. There's so many tools out there. You got to really think of what the overall direction you're going with for your particular use case, right? So to answer simply, it's a lot. So, but
to answer simply, it's not simple.
Exactly, right?
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah.
That's how we do it. So if we continue on from that, I think we're helping everybody who's listening in to understand that this is why it's a mentality. It's not just here's a set path. There are different guidelines and different pieces of, let's say, architectural best practices. But when it comes to DevSecOps as a whole, what you have to realize, it's from start to finish a mentality, and then you adopt your tools around your mentality for your organization's particular use case. Right? Also, you can adopt the like and subscribe for this, right? We always got to do that. Feel free to like and subscribe the AWS Twitch channel to bring you more content like this. Right? Because as we start to delve into and understand what's happening within the universe, sometimes we have to look back a little bit. And where do we look back? Well, we look back into some legends, because I think it's time for a side quest. So as SideQuest legend has it, one day I shall do the announcer voice. I'm going to go into mountains and train. Yes, the world. One SideQuest, one man, one security consultant. Wanted to understand, like, hey, I have this customer. They have, let's say, a principal security engineer at a fintech company, and they're tasked with transforming their traditional security practices into cloud native DevSecOps mentality. Right? Just do this thing that, that's kind of the direction they got. Open a Jira ticket and figure it out. So when we start to look at our use case, like, hey, maybe they're a payment processor if they're in fintech. Now they have a platform that processes over 1 million transactions. You have to be 1 million, right? Daily. And they have to comply to the usual, the PCI DSS, the SOC 2, right? And various other international banking regulations. So when we think of this customer use case, I posed the question to the audience. But first, Russ, what's the biggest AWS DevSecOps challenge that they may face based on this scenario? Fintech company, security engineer, figure out DevSecOps. Go.
I mean, there's a lot of challenges there, but I'm going to go with what I think will be the most important part of that process, which would be the compliance aspect. So I think that's going to be the biggest challenge is how do you integrate the compliance piece into the CI/CD pipeline?
Yes. So that brings us to some good points. So I think in order to continue on this quest, we need a certain board of the SideQuest variety, right? So hold on, let me figure out how to go on this SideQuest. You know what? It's funny. When we do a SideQuest, usually it works right away. There might be a bug, or there might not be. And this is where a mentality shift comes in, because I'm doing this on purpose. I've done this a couple of times. So when we start to think of how exactly we shall handle something, right, of a SideQuest, we start to figure out, hey, we can go pretty much anywhere, right? So where do we go? Well, we don't go over here. We don't go up here. Where we might think of is just going to Russ and starting to figure out, how do we exactly figure out the best way to handle something? Well, it's to take that step back and to think about, hey, we have this SideQuest board. And what the SideQuest board usually shows us is a way in physical form that we can understand our AWS environment, especially when we're on the SideQuest legend. So we have our security engineer who's a principal in how they handle items, right? So I handle this all the time. But the challenge that they're facing is they're going from traditional on-prem to a cloud migration in a fintech company. So when we start to think about this, we start to say, hey, my AWS environment's all the way over here. I have my sensitive data. I have all my transactions pending. So in order to build out a secure path, not for our others that are not part of our organization, but for a secure person, we have to start to figure out, okay, how do I start this challenge? And based on Russ's advice, we start to go down the route of, hey, maybe we should do some automation. Maybe we should have some pieces of the puzzle. Maybe we should have something like, oh no, step functions.
Yeah.
Right? Just throw a step function, a wild step function appears. So when we take a look at this, we start to figure out, hey, there's a bunch of different ways we can do and navigate this. Because think of it this way, it's a mindset, right? So how can we automate away some of the manual tasks that maybe we used to do traditionally on-prem and start to have more mentality of planning from the beginning? The nice thing about step functions is you want to plan from the beginning how and what this step function is going to do. So it kind of brings you to that DevSecOps mindset, right? Because maybe you have multiple development teams across different time zones. You have the compliance requirements. You have manual security reviews. Well, let's automate some of these with some event-driven architectures. Now we're starting to understand, like, hey, where are our bottlenecks and what can we automate? So, Russ, in your experience dealing with customers, what have you seen their main security bottleneck be that overall slows down their AWS deployments?
Yeah, so I would say, well, I want to say two. The actual, when you were talking about manual reviews, that slows everything down significantly, which doesn't actually allow the security team to be able to necessarily keep up with everything that's going on. And so once you're inundated with backlogs and all that stuff, stuff starts to get missed, alert fatigue sets in, and then before you know it, you're hitting me up and saying that you're compromised. But also another one that I think, I'm sure, I feel like you're going to talk about it a lot, but just not having those security integrations from their on-prem security infrastructure or architecture. So just being able to actually figure out, when and where you want to integrate, these checks, hopefully automated, which is what we're going for right now. But when and where they're supposed to be, and where they would do the least amount of harm to your pipeline, as far as slowing things down or, potentially even creating, outages or issues. So I think those are going to be the two big ones that I see.
Yes. And you also were going towards a path. You're like, why and what? But the who is also part of it. Right. And I know you're going there when you're thinking of, the integration between the on-prem and the cloud environment. Not all, let's say connections are created equally. What we mean by that is you want to make sure whatever needs access. You just don't want to allow, everything talk to each other, right? Because this is all my environment now. No, you want to implement the concept of least privilege. Least privilege 3 times for the people on the other side of the interwebs. So as we go on our legend and trying to figure out our security bottlenecks, sometimes it takes a second, right? You might have your event-driven architecture, but you also want to have least privilege baked in, because that's the true way that you start to head towards having your target state security strategy. And along the way, hey, what you want to do is empower the different developers within your environment. So you may have event-driven architecture, but maybe you want to have some Lambda functions as well, right? And what do those Lambdas do? Well, depends on who's using it. we can have the different infrastructure team use it in a certain way that, hey, when you see this particular item, trigger a Lambda function. Maybe it's a escalation path that you get some type of alerting that pops up that says, hey, there was a guard duty alert that popped up, and it's just like, hey, something's happening with an environment. Trigger this workflow to notify this team, send out a Slack message, so on and so forth. Yes, you can have event-driven do all of this, but you want to drive that security mindset throughout your organization. So you also want some simple methods to empower your teams. So I think Lambda functions is that good, happy medium that people are kind of comfortable with. Like, hey, we get it. Have some Python that's triggered when this happens. Done. Yep. And then eventually, as your organization matures, what you start to have more of is that event-driven architecture. So we're driving towards that mindset. So make sure that we have all these pieces of the puzzle, because as you wrap around to your AWS environment, you're getting towards a secure place. And what is the solution? Hey, maybe having something like config rules triggered. AWS Security Hub is another method. Having organizational SCPs. These are all solutions to the puzzle of our fintech engineer who's trying to develop a DevSecOps mindset. And we already spoke about it a little bit. And what we'll do is hit that pause game, the Zach Morris timeout, as I call it, and jump back out for a second and talk about security scanning stages in your pipeline. Make sure you have them. The reason why we say that, and we keep emphasizing it, is because you want the correct security tools within your pipeline in order to have the checks and balances automated so that you have security testing gates. So high and critical vulnerabilities, they don't go into production. They don't go to the next stage. Developer has to fix this before it gets promoted from its current environment. Just those little steps.
Absolutely.
Step back. Right.
And
so
actually that does bring us back to the point you made earlier where you can use those things like security gateways or checkpoints or whatever, and use Lambda to actually automate that for you. So before any code goes and deploys, have the Lambda check for Security Hub critical and high findings. It doesn't have to be the most complex automation, that's doing all sorts of things. Simple ones, get the easy wins.
Yes,
stuff like
exactly. That. And that's what we're looking for. A lot of easy wins, right? Because how do you level up in a video game? You take one XP point, one slime, one little thing at a time, right? That's what you got to do. And eventually you're just like, oh yeah, I'm leveled up. But another thing to do is recognize where your current maturity level is. And I think we have a poll that we can show everybody to kind of demonstrate this, right?
Yep.
And when you think of yourself, what's your DevSecOps character class, right? Are you a noob? You're just starting out with DevSecOps, or you're a warrior, doing it for 1 to 2 years, a wizard, a boss. All these things are important because when you understand what level you're at, feel free to put 1, 2, 3, or 4 in the chat. But it's also important to say, hey, this is where we are and we need to grow. This is where the training and development, there's shameless plug, there's a lot of different AWS Twitch channels that can help you level up each step away. But feel free to put this in the chat. When I think of myself, I think of like, hey, the seasoned veteran, the wizard, right?
Yeah. This is anti-melee class propaganda. I've got to say that.
There's no melee classes in here, right? There's no there's warriors, but there's no, anything else.
Yeah, putting warrior below wizard, I don't know. That seems biased to me. I just call it how I see it.
Yeah. So,
but yeah.
Well, boss. You can be a boss, melee character.
That's fair.
So now knowing is half the battle. If you get that reference, yes, you are waking up.
You need to go take a nap.
Yeah. You're waking up, you need to turn your back.
It's nap time for you. What are you doing?
So yeah, I think it's a good conversation to have, not only just with yourself, but with your entire team. and kind of understanding where everybody is, because sometimes organizations and customers, they think of, hey, I have these star players, and their star players are 2 people out of their 100-person team. And you know what that makes it? It's like, hey, maybe we need to level up everybody else, because if you have 80 noobs and 2 wizards, the wizards will get overwhelmed, right? Because they're too busy. They have casting times, right? And also nap times, right? G.I. Joe, see? They get the reference. That one person makes me happy. So thank you, Drag, for that. Coming back to it, though, when we're thinking of, all right, we understand what tools we have to use. Another part of this is the visibility and having some type of dashboarding mechanism. Another mindset to have when you think of DevSecOps. You may say, hey, why? Well, you're rapidly developing a secure manner and you're planning from the beginning, but you want to have some mechanism to say, hey, I have 100, 500, 1,000 different AWS accounts. Well, now I have to understand what's happening within those accounts. And this kind of goes into my favorite topic of like gamifying dashboards, of having leaderboards and all those kind of things where you have, hey, this account has 99.9%, security in it. Okay, great. But this one has 50. Well, let's have a discussion. Why do you have 50? So what are your thoughts, Russ?
Yes. I think that there is a lot of complexity, once you start adding in scale. And you're right. It's hard to focus on those people that, are wizards on teams full of noobs, which seems mean, but accurate. And so, yeah, I think that there's a lot that can kind of be said for that. I feel like I kind of lost my train of thought there and just started to go off into space. But it is, there is that whole idea where, you're trying to take these tasks, integrate them into existing pipelines, architecture, whatever you want to call it, without really affecting negatively, unless you need to, as like a high critical response or whatever. And yeah, it's I'm just going to end it there because I think my point is already made and I'm just rambling, but yeah, there's a lot once you start to scale up and you add complexity and you have these alerts and you have to kind of make that decision between like, okay, well, these are security alerts, but they're not really going to the security team because this is a CI/CD pipeline. So, we're going to take those alerts and send them to the dev team and, ensure that, that's happening because, I mean, one security team can't handle, multiple different dev teams. So there's a lot that goes into it once you start to scale and kind of get things a little bit more complex that you have to take into account and consideration.
Yeah. And that's the thing is sometimes when you're thinking of your overall posture, sometimes you take out the outliers, right? The people who helped, like we were talking about a principal security engineer, maybe that was their only task, right? But everybody else is on-prem. So when you have more of new individuals to the AWS cloud and the security practices, there's going to be a learning curve. So sometimes you have to figure out, going back to the minimum security baseline, hey, we have a baseline in place. Let's try and catch other individuals up with training, certifications, things of that nature, right? In order to get to a place where, hey, everybody knows a little bit about security best practices, right? And having those wizards kind of train a couple of people. And this is kind of certificate knowledge. Pop that on the screen for a little bit. But it's also just practical of hands-on keyboard, of just trying to figure out how do I go through and understand. I also say, hello, Maximum. Thank you for joining.
What up?
So as we continue on this path of, okay, now we have the dashboards and metrics and figuring out, hey, security hub, something simple that we can integrate, centralize, consolidate multiple tools into one location, right? It doesn't have to be 4 different tools and 4 different dashboards, but having one, can help a little bit. Then you can start to feed, let's say, the guard duty stuff in there, and then config stuff in there, inspector findings, as we were speaking about. And then you can start to get into continuous monitoring. And continuous monitoring strategy is interesting. Why do I say it's interesting? Because there are logs, lots of logs. That was my best Keanu Reeves. I didn't try, but we need logs, lots of logs. You have CloudTrail logs, VPC logs, DNS logs, right? To say the least. So now, when something happens, when code is deployed, you want to search. You want to be able to identify if something happens. You have your triggers in the environment, but another piece is we talked about is compliance. If we were going back to our SideQuest, we have PCI DSS and different, let's say, compliance guidelines that we have to follow. Logs is a big part. So understanding how these monitoring tools handle your logs and what are the sensitivity levels that you have to have in your logs, all part of your DevSecOps approach, right? And knowing the best practices that come with it. Because how important are logs to your side of the house, Russ?
So important. So important. I will also say that there is definitely a direct correlation to the amount of incidents we receive and the number of those incidents that have logging enabled, for sure. And I understand that there's definitely, especially with cost sensitive customers, why would we pay for logs, blah, blah, blah. And I understand that there's definitely there's tons of different ways you can kind of lower that cost, different strategies that you can use. But you should have at least, some base level logs to be able to, if not troubleshoot, then, contain and remediate your security incidents. So it's hugely important because without logs, you don't have visibility. And if you don't have visibility, you don't know what's going on. And so it's the number one thing that we, send, that's the first recommendation that I make when I'm talking to a customer after an incident is you have to enable logging somehow. Whether you're going to, add some sort of, say a life cycle policy for your logs or whatever, in order to decrease that cost. But you have to have those logs or you're just not going to be able to see what is happening. So if it's even during troubleshooting, you don't know if this is like a misconfiguration or if it's a security event because you don't have any visibility into that. If you're not actively logging what's happening, you can't really make that determination. And then you're going to come to my team and we're going to have to tell you the bad news that you're compromised.
Yeah. And the way I like to look at it is like Jeopardy, right? Trying to guess, right? Oh, what's the phrase, right? The more letters that you have, the easier it is to guess the phrase, right? So when you're thinking of your overall logging architecture, it's the same type of thought, right? And consideration is like, okay, can I guess the phrase just with, 1 or 2 letters, right?
Wait, did you say Jeopardy?
Yeah, I meant Wheel of Fortune.
Wheel of Fortune.
Yeah, it's
Fortune.
Yeah, right. You see how my brain kind of lumped them in together. What is the wrong answer for that's but figuring out those different components, right? You have to invest in things that make sense for your organization environment's outcome, right? Yeah. So shameless plug, a good combination, Security Lake to gather all that information from different sources, even third party, open search, add that in there, you have a robust searching mechanism, right? You can do ad hoc searching and a bunch of other things. So just one of those things to consider. But another thing to consider, if we bring up another poll to think about, is when it gets to AWS services, right? When you think of services, what is your secret weapon when it comes to services? Is it Amazon Guard Duty? You have your Watchstars, you have your command center with AWS Security Hub, your spy network with AWS Config, Magic Shields, AWS WAF, Dragon Allies, custom tools. Right? All these are interesting components when you think of strategy games, right? You see how we kind of loop that back into the question, but feel free to put 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in the chat. I would have to personally go with, I got to go with Watchtowers, Guard Duty. Right, we have to go through that. Right, it's like one of those things. But Russ, what is yours?
I'm gonna have to go with Security Hub as my command center. I like that overall holistic view that you get from Security Hub, and the ability to kind of get a snapshot of what's going on. There's also a lot of different ways that you can integrate Security Hub. I mean, you can use it for all sorts of different things, but you can also use it as like a final check for before deployment. Hey, is there anything critical or high? And so I think that there's a lot of functionality within that. But I think, like, if I'm talking about my perspective from like what I do currently, I'd probably go with custom tools, just because, like you were saying earlier with like step functions and stuff like that, it's kind of an example of a custom tool. But building those out to really customize for your environment and what your endpoint security state is, like you always love to say, those custom tools can really fine grain once you are like have a more mature program. You can really get into the nitty gritty and kind of do things based off of your environment and less off of what the functionality of the services are. So I guess I'm picking 2 and cheating.
Yeah, it's funny because I thought you were going to go 5 with just Dragon because it has Dragon in there, but you still went back around to it, right? I like it. And other people said Security Hub as well. So we have a couple there. But I think the real item that we also need to think about when we're bringing it back to our mindset, our DevSecOps mindset, and our fundamentals approach is, hey, threat modeling, right? That's a big part of just identifying, hey, what are we doing right? What are we doing wrong? What can we do better? Those questions that you start to ask yourself when it comes to environments, right? So when we think of that, threat modeling is also a piece when you're shifting left, because you should have the type of ongoing assessment of, hey, what's happening with our AWS workloads? And this often brings together a bunch of different individuals and different items. What I mean by that is usually there's multiple teams working on something. But when you threat model, everybody comes to the table as well as serves, like a security incident response simulation. So development, operations, security teams, everybody comes, right? You pick the threat modeling approach of your choice. You got your Stride, you got your Pasta, you got your MITRE, but picking one and going with it, right? And starting to have an understanding of what's happening within your environment. It's a very important tool and very important part to kind of understand, right? And why do I say that? Because you're looking at every single part. And what is DevSecOps and what is threat modeling is an iterative approach to saying, are we doing the right thing? Speaking of that, when we want to do the right thing, we want to kind of build our knowledge. We want to go on, hey, a knowledge quest in order to build our aura, right? So we put this knowledge quest time next to our other build aura banner because, hey, we want to do this for a certain reason. We want to go out and build. So the first step of building is understanding. And we mentioned a couple of different things today, a couple of different services. So it's hard to pinpoint. But when you think of where to start, I think the place to start is with stuff like what Russ was saying. Hey, Security Hub seems like a good place, right? Figuring out how everything integrates together and then kind of spreading out from there. And this is how you become a level 100 explorer. because you start out in the hub city, just like any good strategy or RPG video game. You're like in the center city. Now you kind of branch off, right? And you're just like, hey, what are these dragons doing over there, right? And you just go down, and then, oh, they're level 100. I should back out because I'm in danger, right? So that's kind of the things that you want to do. You want to dive in and figure out, hey, how does this fit together? And then from there, you can start to think of what else we were talking about, like code scanning. Dangerous to go alone. So take a tool like Amazon Q Developer. You're starting to go down the DevSecOps mindset, automation. Hey, this is a cool article to figure out, hey, how can I do some code scanning that's live, right, within my environment? I think that's a big part to understand and figure out. So this is still at the explorer level. But if you want to be an adventurer, you have to do some more adventurous stuff, right? So for the level 200, what is a step function? And starting to go through diagrams. And this is what we meant when, like, hey, you can automate a lot of different things, but you have to understand what the overall plan is. Yep. What is the end state? What is the outcome? Because it's a powerful tool, but you want to understand your use cases. You want to understand your workflow, things of that nature. And that's how you overall kind of strengthen your DevSecOps mindset within your organization. You can also read some blogs in relation to the same thing, because you're a adventurer now. Things like secrets management, KMS, and certificate manager don't scare you now, right? You kind of got that. And you understand the applications of all of these services. So when you see a diagram like this, hey, I can handle it. Right? I'm going down. Right? You ever see a diagram, you're like, oh, and you got to take a step back? It's a little bit easier. But if you want to become a legendary strategist, you want to understand how everything fits together. The way you do that is delve in. How does different tools work with AWS? This is often a question. Hey, I'm a customer. I have multi-cloud. I have this tool set. I use Security Hub for this, but I use this for this. I use for that. Well, how does everything integrate? There's some workshops that you can go down the path of, hey, Cloud DevSecOps, HashiCorp, Palo Alto, and AWS together. Well, one of the things, code scanning. Make sure that it's code scanning. Taking it through, understanding how these different things fit together. Hey, this is an important one. Check off. If you're running Terraform, you should be familiar with this. This is how you become a legendary security strategist, by understanding kind of the field and the momentum and everything in between. Because eventually you're going to get to a point where everybody considers you the legendary security strategist, whether you like it or not, because you're that go-to person, right? Because that's what often happens within an organization. It's like, oh, they have cloud knowledge, so go. So what you want to do is be prepared. And how do you prepare, Russ? If we had one takeaway today, outside of, keep on side questing and building up your experience points, because every XP point, eventually you level up, no matter how many slimes you got to go after. Right? So what is your one takeaway for today?
I think my one takeaway would be that this is a continuous process. You use the term iterative, which is wonderful, right? Because you build upon everything you do. So once you start with your basics, you have a Lambda function that looks for critical vulnerabilities in Security Hub. Now you use that to be able to increase your security posture. So, hey, how do we prevent this finding from, finding its way into our code in the future? How do we, maybe integrate this new tool to be able to increase our ability to catch things? So there's a lot there, but it's a process, and it's a never-ending process. So I think that's my big takeaway. Yes. And also create an incident response plan.
Exactly. And that's the big takeaway, as well as making Russ big for this, because we're talking about incident response plans and the ones that you should have, right? So, yep. But until next time, have fun, keep on side questing, keep on exploring, right? So cheers and all that good stuff. Have a great one, and thank you for joining.